got a nice big chunk of time with you all today. So just to explain the format very quickly, what we're going to do is we're going to split this into two parts. So the first half hour or so, we've got some very esteemed guests with us today, with Wendy and Jim, and they're going to be giving you their thoughts on life as a business change manager thus far in the process. Because as we know, finance is a little bit accelerated in terms of work that's going on in that stream. So I think it's good for us to tell you what it's like as a project delivery team, but it's better to hear it from your peers. So I think some good insight there. And then as you can see, from a observant of you in the room, we've put some lovely wallpaper up to start decorating over from an event lifecycle mapping. So we'll be giving you a brief on why we're doing that after the Q&A. So I suppose we'll get going now. What we're going to do is we're going to ask a few questions up front first, and then we'll open it up to you guys, and you can ask any questions you want to Jim, Wendy. Cool. So thank you. Hello. Okay, so a few questions that we've run through. So I suppose the first one is to Wendy. What was your initial reaction to being asked to be a business change manager on the EA project?
It was a combination. I initially was excited at being able to do something different and learn and advance myself. On the other hand, I was very nervous about what happens once we're live and do I have a job? So it was a mixed bag, but for the most part, I was actually very excited about being able to learn and affect what we do and how we do it going forward.
Good. Okay, so Jim, what have been your key areas of responsibility so far in the process?
I'm the business change manager for accounting, so Wendy is for finance. So Wendy looks at the shows and the individual, the teams and the events, the groups of events and so forth, and I look at more of the background stuff with accounts payable, accounts receivable, fixed assets, sales incentives, and so forth. But you're not expected, which brings up a concern that many of you may have about what is expected of you in terms of your knowledge level of areas that you're not directly involved in, because I'm involved in a bunch of stuff that I never touched before I got involved in this. It's fairly daunting when you think about it, but you're not expected to be a subject matter expert. So you are going to be a researcher and gain a ton of knowledge about stuff that you don't normally work in, which is very interesting and very challenging, but you're not expected to be a subject matter expert.
So, Wendy, in terms of what activities you've done to date and some of the learnings and challenges you've had in each of those activities?
So, as Jim said, I'm doing the show side of it, so the majority of what I've been working on is developing a budget and forecast tool that's efficient and effective. I've also worked with other divisions around the world to come up with a consistent method of how we're going to record revenue and expenses that will give a true definition of how the shows are doing, but also be able to analyze the information later as we go forward. I've worked with the developers, the CIT developers, on, again, efficient ways and effective ways to forecast and budget. I've also worked, less, more Jim, but a little bit with how we're processing invoices or expense reports as we go into this new system. Because it really is a complete revamp of everything finance.
So in terms of the tasks that we've kind of gone through, if we put it up a level, around some of the tasks we've done, so things like process walkthroughs with CIT,
Yep.
knowledge transfers, do you want to just expand on some of the challenges or some of the things you enjoyed about that?
One of the things that I found was a learning experience for me within this process is there's a lot that happens prior to your involvement in terms of accumulating requirements and so forth. The UK is going live with this first. We're the second to go live. So some of the perspective that you may have going into this is that the people that you'll be working with are going to have a lot of knowledge, or they're going to have a baseline knowledge of most of the stuff that you're going to be working on. And that is an assumption that you should really fight that. Try to make sure that everything that you think may be important, you bring up and ask them about it. I've been really surprised at times, really hesitant to bring up something that I would have thought was definitely already known or considered and resolved, and they hadn't thought of it at all. So there's things that they had thought of that I wouldn't have thought they would be that far along, but it's a mixture. So you want to make sure, don't have the assumption that they know it, or that there's anything that you shouldn't discuss or see as a concern, you know, what's going to happen if we don't have this or that. Just bring it up.
Okay, good. And so over to you, Jim, in terms of time commitment so far on the project. I know that's been a question that's kind of bubbled around this audience especially. So,
well, I'm someone who really only had a partial backfill to my position, so everybody's experience is going to be a little bit unique to them. You're going to have your hands in this big time, but there's also going to be other responsibilities that you're going to, you don't want to see the stuff that you've created and that you have running like a clock start to struggle a little bit because you're not able to keep an eye on it. So it's a mixture. 2 weeks are alike. It's going to change because we've been through part of the process. We haven't been through, we're midway with a lot more to come. So it's going to change. It's going to probably get a little bit more intensive, but there are weeks where it is quite challenging because a lot of time is taken up on this. It's not just the meetings, it's also the research that you have to do in the background with the subject matter experts that are in your area. You're going to have a lot of knowledge transfer that happens at that level as well.
So just to tag on to that, have you found that a challenge balancing your new responsibilities against business as usual operations?
I would say yes, because though the people that I work for are very supportive of this, extremely so, you have backfills that are working on various aspects of what you used to do that are now you're overseeing, and a lot of them are going to be new or less experienced or more experienced people, but it's going to be things that they haven't done in the past very much because you did them yourself. So and nobody's going to want to hear it if something important gets screwed up and you say, well, I was working on EA and I lost track of that. So there is a challenge there to stretch yourself and try to balance that stuff.
What's it just been like with people like Arnie and Eileen supporting you as the sponsors with helping you balance those tasks between EA and your usual business activities?
Well, for me, Arnie is in a lot of the meetings and working with me on a lot of the stuff that I'm working on. So he has a very intimate knowledge in most cases of the importance of it and the need to spend a lot of time on those things. However, there's still going to be other times when he's less involved, and you have to make sure that you keep the information, the communication going to make sure that people understand where your time is going to be constricted, where you're restricted, and aware of what's upcoming in terms of the schedule.
Eileen?
Eileen has been very supportive in that if I feel like it's too much at a particular time to balance that with my normal workload, she will step into a meeting that maybe she'll go to one or I'll go to one. We'll split it if need be. She's very supportive of that. But Jim was right by saying the communication has to flow up and down. Both to the SMEs, but to Eileen and Arnie and even Greg. Make sure that, because Eileen and Arnie do have knowledge that I don't necessarily have, or the SMEs have knowledge that I don't necessarily have, so I may not be thinking of everything, and they could, you know, throw something else back and forth.
Okay. And then, in terms of, you touched on the SMEs there, obviously coming through the knowledge transfers, the process walkthroughs, you're seen as a champion for those functions and processes now in finance. So what's that been like working and championing processes that you're not necessarily directly responsible for on a day-to-day basis?
It really is, it's a learning process for me as well as it is, you know, not just learning this new system, but learning roles that I didn't necessarily know. So it is important that I take notes both from the SMEs or above, Eileen and Marnie, and be consistent with those notes and not try and be an expert in something I'm not an expert yet in. You know, I really have to just learn my way through both ways. And what I do know, I'll fight for what I think is right.
Good. And then Jim, from your experience, how do you find it working with the SMEs, especially those that wouldn't directly report to you on a day by day?
Well, it's no problem in getting their time. They understand, they are all fully prepped on what their role is and the importance of it and so forth. What you have to do with the SMEs is encourage them to go from the general to the specific. So they're going to have things that they may assume that you know and you don't know it. They have things that they must have, essential stuff that they do. You need to encourage them to provide you with that information and then filter down to the more specific stuff and try to get a feel for them where they keep coming back to certain things that just seem to be really important. And then you've got to come back to them because on Monday they may not remember something that's really important that a week later they will remember and they'll communicate to you. So, you know, while in the subject matter area that you're working in, you're going to have some knowledge. So, but they're going to have all the details, and some of the details are pretty tricky to deal with because we're going from to a new system that, while it has a lot more horsepower, it's not, you know, specifically designed for what we do, like Prism and Onyx are. We've already had our hands on those things for years, and we've customized them tremendously. Dave can attest to that. We've you know, really gone back a million times to try and get changes. So you need to really stick with the subject matter experts to glean from them things that you don't want to have slip through the cracks.
I've learned quite a bit through overall finance meetings that I really actually never gave much thought to, like fulfillment of Freeman items. I know it happens, I never really knew how it happened. And it's neat to understand now that, you know, start understanding the process of how does it go from a salesperson books it into a system to the exhibitor actually receives that chair, so to speak. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned that, quite honestly, I am a little frazzled sometimes. Surprise to many of you, I know. But that, you know, it's actually just been a really good experience for me because I have learned so much about the business as a whole, the business globally, and then myself.
Good. Okay. So, at that point, we take a pause and we're opening it up to everyone in the room. So if you'd like to ask any questions to Jim and Wendy, please feel free now. Matt.
How are you reporting not just back to the SMEs, but more for the rest of the department? How specific are you getting with what's going on with EA?
That is it's actually an interesting question because in my mind, I was not being very specific. I was talking about general processes, and I'm sorry, in particular, I'm talking about communicating up to Eileen, Arnie, and Greg. And I was not being very specific until I realized that Eileen and Arnie want specifics. So that's, again, something I've had to adjust in myself. As far as the SMEs go, we've had conversations with them, I've had conversations with them, but In my group, there's not much that I can show them because we don't actually have the budget and forecast system yet, or a chart of accounts, or an expense report. So
But
it's
what
sort
about
of-
even further down from the SMEs?
The regular-
Finance managers or anything like that?
The people outside of the change
people
network.
outside,
Yeah.
exactly.
Finance.
I've had very little interaction with them at this point, other than to say, you know, we're revising the chart of accounts, how things are coded. For the few things that I am skeptical about, I will say that I'm skeptical about it, but I'll say that it's a work in progress, you know? I anticipate it getting better, being more efficient, whatever.
Anyone else?
Did you have any good to that?
No, it's good.
Charlie?
As far as like negotiating around functionality, how does that process work? What sort of influence do you have? You know, and how comfortable do you feel with that process? If something doesn't meet your needs, or you don't think it meets your needs, how do you go about that?
One of the most important words that you guys are gonna learn, if you haven't learned it already, is gaps. One of the most important aspects of this is to go through all of your processes, do the knowledge transfer sessions, and identify where the gaps are. Things that you're currently able to do that either the UK doesn't do at all, so it's not in what's called Release 1, which is their rollout of this, which will go first. So they don't do it at all, like they don't have a lockbox, so nothing has been prepared for that. We're gonna have to have that added. There's also gaps that are things that the designers don't see as really a possibility right now. And it's gonna they're really gonna have to work on it. And there's a number of things like that. You try to mitigate the gaps where it's possible to do it. There are not a lot of gaps. There are more things that are opportunities within the software to make us more efficient and provide more value to our customers, like all of the things that we're going to be able to do out of Salesforce in terms of the contract and the invoicing. We're going to be able to do a lot better job of communicating with them, getting them more timely information, and so forth. But you do need to identify the gaps. That's the first stage of it. Find out if they can be mitigated, and then when it's a gap, usually it's something that's going to be very important, like the lockbox or the check request, which is something that the UK doesn't do either. All of you guys probably have touched that. You know, that's another important one that we're working on that is not resolved at this point. So first you have to identify them, gather all the info, identify where those gaps are. It's a crucially important aspect of this for all of the business change managers.
So I have a question with regards to time management and working with the SMEs and being respectful of their current positions, and, you know, did you set up the meetings more in the morning in order to capture the information that you needed to, you know, be able to compile the data, you know, all the processes and things like that? I mean, were they mostly readily available? I mean, did you find that you kind of came into conflicts where you were more on a deadline or had to, you know, present something to the sponsors or to management when they were traveling and, you know, we're all in different.
I mean, that's very important, and for me, because my team doesn't have to call the West Coast in the morning, or, you know, we don't have that complexity. So I really was able to just schedule a meeting when I knew that they were in the office, when it wasn't you know, I wouldn't necessarily do it the week budgets are due, because nobody's gonna have time for that. You know, I tried to work around their schedules, but I would just really schedule meetings when I knew worked for the SMEs that were related to the information I needed. Absolutely, there were times when I was able to go at such a slow pace, and I wasn't used to it. It was actually kind of hard for me. I'm like, you know, I have too much time, I don't know what to do. Other times, absolutely under the gun, something had to be done, you know. developing all our information before we had the knowledge transfer to be able to say, these are the key things I really need to see or understand. And there's absolutely peaks and valleys, but we work for trade shows, and that's also part of the, you're ramping up for the show, and then there's the valley after a show, and we're all used to it to an extent. As far as there are processes that I've done that I feel comfortable with, and other things that just I feel so out of my element on, like sitting up here. Just so you know.
I could add to that a little bit. To be perfectly honest, some of the timing of this has changed as we've gone along because of problems that the UK has had with their schedule, and so that has changed some of the resources that we've had available to us. That has changed our schedule and what we were expecting. Wendy and I are like a broken record asking, can we please just see it? Can we please can you just put me in front of a terminal somewhere and leave me for a week and just let me see it? And you would want that to happen, and it's going to happen, but you have to get into the mindset of being able to look at things in one-dimensionally at this point, and focus on the stuff that we're doing now. And because that once you are able to get your hands on it, the learning curve is going to be much faster. So, but that is one of the things that it's been challenging to work through those changes and to not have access to it. So you have to work through that.
Good. Any other questions?
Just more of a comment. When Jim was mentioning training and some things that might help you guys along in this role, time management, project management, we are going to be bringing back the Effective Edge for Professionals time management program. August 4th and 5th, I think, is when we have them scheduled to come back for training the GM team. I will open it up to you guys too. We've got a limited number of seats, but it's all about managing your time. It's sort of centered around managing through Outlook, and you might think it sounds kind of lame, but it's actually people who've gone through that program. Did anybody in here go through it? It really changes your perspective on managing your time and your day. I went through it myself, and I completely changed the way that I set my priorities and plan my day, plan my week, plan my month. So if that's something that you're interested in, I can certainly send an invite out to you guys to be a part of that. I think that'll definitely complement this role.
Thank you, Rick. We'll be charging you for that bit of advertising space.
No, that's good. I think he's come out quite strong up here. Time management, organisation is a key part of this role. So anything we can do to support you to get ahead of that, we will. Any other questions? Denise?
Yeah, I have one. I'm not sure how many of you may be thinking this or have already started kind of putting a toe in this water just yet, but since the finance group is much further ahead in some of that knowledge exchange around EA, and the rest of us are still kind of waiting to get there, you're starting to see the previews of some of the one company global processes. There's what the system does, and then there's the way that we want to work commonly. Could you share how you're working through that? Jim, you talked about gaps, and I imagine that some of those gaps are actually being asked to work a different way. How is it kind of coming across those one company processes, and how are you both working through the compromise discussions, if you will? And any advice you have for this group as they hit them?
That's an interesting question. I think that in terms of compromises, there hasn't been very much of that. There has been some dead ends, if you will, some things that we haven't been able to get any movement on so far, but they're not given up on yet. So the compromising, I think, is going to come eventually in certain cases. It's inevitable because things have to be, suitable for all the different, global divisions. So, but we haven't seen, I would say anyway, we haven't seen that much of that. Frankly, maybe not as much as I would have thought, but in some key areas we have seen it. But they're not, but they are, they haven't been compromised on yet so much. I can't think of anything specific. Like the check request is vitally important to us. There is no version of that is going to be in release 1. We really need it. They haven't said no, right? But it hasn't been developed. So not so much compromising yet, but unless you can think of anything that's a specific compromise or.
We've had a few in show finance, not many. For the most part, I found, I've worked with the UK and I've worked with EDEM and a little bit with France. And for the most part, we're pretty consistent with how we handle the shows themselves. There's been a few things that we've had to battle over. And the biggest battle is wording and what we're calling things. And that is, it's just a language difference. I mean, we were in a meeting yesterday and we were looking at what they call, what the UK calls booth cleaning, they call waste management or waste something. It was waste something, I'm sorry, I don't remember what it was. That doesn't resonate here, and it may not resonate in other countries, but for the most part, it hasn't, we've been consistent around the world. I do think you need to pick your battles. If it's something important, you have to fight for it, like the check request. And really maybe fight for it, because the UK doesn't use a check request, so they don't understand why it's important to us. Other things, if it's using the word waste or using the word trash, maybe you let that go.
Okay, good. So just before we close out, any other questions that anyone's thinking of?
Just big picture, I mean, do we know where the UK is and where our timing is now in relation to that? And when it sounds like there are a lot of resources dedicated to EA in the UK that haven't been available to assist us in onboarding and ramping up, do we know when that will start to?
So, to be completely candid, we don't know. I'll answer the second part of your question first. We don't know when we're going to go live. We're shooting January Q1. Whether that's feasible, obviously, the more runway that goes past, and we're not getting support, the less feasible that becomes. In terms of where the UK are right now, they're going through a replanning phase. So in the next 2 weeks, that means they should have a date, what they're targeting to go live with their release 1 activities. The noises we're hearing so far are, it's not going to be weeks, it'll probably be months from the end of June. Obviously, once we hear that, we can start looking at what that does to our plan and moving our sliding scale. The other piece of the puzzle, I'd say, which Jim and Wendy have touched on, is obviously defining our scope. So when we get CIT resource available to us to support the ramp up and our activities that we need to do, both from a technical development and business readiness perspective, we can start fleshing out that scope. The more we see, the more we understand the system, we're going to have a defined scope that we need for release 2. Then obviously that's going to be weighted, that's going to be timed out. We're going to see what that timeline is to get to the release. So we have a better idea once we've gone through and we've got those 2 components. Cool.
I just had a question for Jim and Wendy around being further along than everybody else and seeing more of the system and being more involved in fleshing things out. How do you think EA is going to impact the business?
From a finance standpoint, it's going to have a huge impact. It's completely different. It is, the general work we do is going to be the same. You're still going to be doing forecasts or, putting in an expense report or sending an invoice out to a customer. But the process and the way you do it is going to be a very big learning curve.
I would just add that Wendy and I were both around for the last big upgrade like this. It was going from the existing systems to Prism and Onyx, and the rollout was just really dreadful. It was
You were here
through the
30
whole.
years ago?
Yes. Don't I look great for 40?
It was a long time, and it was really dreadful. And so one of the things that concerned me the most when this thing started was, were we going to get some consultants coming in who were going to say, well, we understand your business completely, and here's what you can do, and here's, we understand. So I figured, okay, there's no way they're gonna do that. It's gotta be done differently this time. So they brought in some consultants from Accenture, which is a huge global, you guys have all heard of it, and they started doing that very same thing. And they are now gone. So the process has changed. I really believe that the approach this time around is completely different. There's openness to everything. When you go into the knowledge transfer sessions, you will not be bored to death by people who want to pitch you on all the great things that Oracle and Salesforce.com can do, and then you go and I'm sure you can figure out how to do it. They really want to know how you do everything, and they want to shape what they have to what you do. I would look at this as a two-phase process, because the phase that we're all involved in is really the first phase, to make sure that the business, when we go live on day one, that everybody can do their jobs and that we meet all of the minimum requirements that we all have and that we're all concerned about, and the SMEs are all concerned about in terms of doing everything they're doing now. They can't, we can't afford to have what happened the last time with the Prism Onyx rollout when sales went into the tank because the people couldn't update notes, and they didn't know how to print invoices, and they didn't know how to change orders and so forth, and they were really struggling. But I wouldn't think, but I would look at that, the first phase, as getting everything that you need to do everything that you're doing now. And then the second phase, you'll see, as soon as you start to look at this stuff, you'll see it'll start to click in the background of your brain all of the potential that this stuff has, because the stuff that we're getting is like comparing a 2005 cell phone to a 2015 smartphone. When we go live, we're going to have to be able to make all the calls and put in all our contacts, but over time, in the second phase, maybe year 2, year 3, we're going to be really pushing all the borders, because that's what we've always done with Prism and with Onyx. We've always, made it work better and better and better, to the point where I think both of those systems are actually quite good at this point.
Service, everything's a big concern, actually, to be honest with you, especially with us being on the other side of the globe compared to the UK. It probably sounds slightly weird with me saying us coming from a UK accent, but we need to pan that out, definitely. That is one thing that Charlie can attest to, and Dave have been involved in the workshops, but from business, service and support perspective.
But also for this group, that's part of the role that you'll play on this project, right? So we're gonna go through these process reviews, we're gonna see it on system, and we're gonna make some decisions about what we get day one for the US. And there will be some known gaps, some challenges, right? So technologically, this is how the system works, or process-wise, this is the process the system supports. Maybe it's a 10-step process, and there's 2 things that create pain points for us. Part of your role on the project is to help create that plan B. All right, so for 6 months, these 2 steps aren't gonna be as effective as we want them to be. So what are we gonna do as a business to kind of triage that, to put a gap fill in place? What's that right solution? What does that cost to the business? So part of your role is really covering that whole spectrum. It's the system stuff and the new ways of working, but it's the gap fill ways of working, right? As part of this evolutionary